Hi there guys, and welcome to another video. Now, I'm sorry there haven't been any videos for a while. Life's just been really hectic lately, but I can assure you there's plenty coming, but going forward I'm planning to release at least one, sometimes two videos a week. Right, so in this video I've got a lot in store for you. You might recall, a few months back, I mentioned my plans to make a big switch, moving my server setup from AMD to Intel. Well, I followed through on that plan and it's been up and running smoothly for quite some time now. But that's not all. Alongside the CPU switch, I also made some other substantial changes as well. First, I made the transition from a regular tower case to a 16-bay rack mount case. Then shortly after that, I switched again to a more spacious 24-bay case. So in this video, we're going to walk through the whole process of building and setting up this server. On the way, diving into topics like HBA cards, cables, backplanes, to try and give a comprehensive understanding of the entire system. And if you stick around towards the end of the video, you're going to see me add a personal touch to my case when I use a laser to etch a unique design onto the top panel. And don't worry, I won't wrap up without addressing a couple of crucial questions. Is the build more energy efficient than the previous AMD build? And after the few months I've been running it, what are my overall impressions and thoughts? Okay, so let's get into it. Right, so let's rewind a few months. Nope, not that far. I was still in the planning stages then of the studio. Yep, you're right, Shadow, we're still too far back. Okay, yeah, this looks a bit more like it, doesn't it, Shadow? So the office was finished and I had the arcade cabinet here, which I wanted to put all my servers in. And as you can see here, my main server was in a large tower case, and in fact I had 2 or 3 other servers as well, so I only had the possibility of fitting one tower in here. And it didn't really look very cool. So I figured it was time to swap my servers into rack mount cases. Now my original plan was to actually build the servers inside the arcade cabinet itself, not inside any kind of case, just taking the hardware out of all of the cases and building it directly into the cabinet itself. But in the end I decided against this because I want to have a UPS in here along with 2 servers and a separate workstation. So I thought it'd be much easier to use 3 4U rack mount cases for the computers along with a 2U UPS. So I ordered some new hardware and it turned up the next day. In the cardboard box there, I ordered a 16-bay hot swap rack mounted case from a company called servercase.co.uk. And as you can see, I actually ordered 2 CPUs. The i5-13600K, a 14-core CPU, and the Intel i9-13900K, its big brother, a 24-core CPU. So why these 2 CPUs, you may be asking? Well, I'm replacing an AMD 5950X, and both of these 2 CPUs, well, according to charts anyway, they seem to outperform my old 5950X. Now, I know what some of you guys may be thinking. Yep, a lot of people have said about the 13th gen Intel, they're quite power hungry. But there's actually 2 sorts of power hungry anyway. Yeah, there's the power hungry when we ramp it up and the CPU's hitting close to 100%. Yeah, these CPUs admittedly will use quite a lot of energy. But what about idle CPU usage? Now that's what I'm interested in. Most of the time my server doesn't really do a lot. So for the few hours I might be gaming on the machine or something like that, well, I'm happy for it to be using power when I'm actually doing something that warrants it. What I don't want is my server eating away a lot of power when it's just being lazy and not doing a thing. And one big advantage for me is the iGPU that can use Intel QuickSync. Now QuickSync's been really good for quite a few generations now, and many of us Unraiders we're running media servers. So transcoding is a workload that our servers often do. And the iGPU is very efficient at doing this, and in my old server I had a separate Quadro P2000 that can now be removed from the server, not only saving me energy, but I can actually go ahead and sell that as well and recoup a bit of the costs of this build. So you're probably wondering why I bought 2 CPUs. Well, I wanted to try both the i5 and the i9, see how they both run, the power usage, and I wanted to do this over a few months, and in my opinion, reviewing how a CPU runs in an Unraid server is very different to just doing some gaming benchmarks and seeing how a CPU does gaming. We really need to use it over multiple months to see all of its little quirks, and that way be able to judge whether it's a good CPU for our servers or not. And for the motherboard, I went with the ASRock Z690 Extreme. Now, I went for the 690 chipset because it's actually more power efficient than the 790, and in my opinion the performance is pretty much the same. Plus also I could use my existing DDR4 memory in that. The rest of the hardware's from the old server except some 4TB NVMe drives, some various SAS cables, quite heavy. And here's the front of the case. You can see there the 16 hot swap bays. And these come out like that. And as well as these bays, there are two 5¼ inch bays as well. Now if I'd actually kept this case, I would have probably put adapters in there to put SSDs in, but in fact later on I changed this to a 24 bay case and one that's slightly longer than this one. This case is the short version of the case at 550mm long. Now it is big enough to fit a full ATX case, but as I found out later on, as you'll see, it didn't fit the graphics card I was hoping to put in. Right, so let's take a look inside. There's a few screws along the side that we have to undo in order to get into the case. And I'm just going to quickly take this plastic wrap off a moment. And now just try and pop off the lid and let's have a look what's inside. Okay, so looking inside of the case here, we can see here there's 320mm fans. And they're pretty cool, they just slide out just like that. And yes, they're regular fans, so probably later on I'll change them to Noctua. To be honest, I was getting a little worried that the motherboard wouldn't fit in, so I wanted to test that. So with the foam on, I just gave it a test to see if it would fit. Then just to be sure, I took the foam off and gave it another size up. So next it was time to put the standoffs on, ready for the motherboard to go in properly. And myself, I always like to put the CPU and the RAM and all that kind of thing into the motherboard before I put the motherboard into the case. Looking at the board here, it's got plenty of SATA, 2 on the left there and 6 on the front, making a total of 8, 3 PCIe slots and 3 NVMe slots. Now in this build I decided I was going to air cool it, and I was going to use the Peerless Assassin, a fairly cheap cooler but pretty decent as well. However, if I decide to keep the i9 in this server, I may have to upgrade this, maybe get an all-in-one, but for now I'm going to use this cooler and see how it goes. And so the first CPU I'm going to try in this server, I think it's going to be the i5. I'll try the i9 a bit later on. So I installed the CPU, the cooler and the fans, put everything in the motherboard, got it all ready. So with the CPU and fan attached to the motherboard now, I can put that in the case in a moment. But before we do that, I just want to talk about SAS cables. Now on the desk here, you can see I've got two different types of SAS cables, and also an HBA controller behind them. So the HBA card will allow me to attach up to 8 hard drives to it. And I've also got 8 SATA ports on the motherboard. So this combination will allow me to have 16 hard drives. So both the HBA card and the SATA ports on the motherboard, they're called the host. They're where we're connecting from, and where the hard drives reside, that's called the target. For me, I'm not plugging directly into hard drives, so the actual hard drives themselves aren't the target, but I'm plugging into the backplane, so for me, the backplane is the target. Now a target can be a hard drive itself, and connecting a SATA hard drive directly to an HBA controller, many people who've got an Unraid server, they might do that. So why do I keep on going on about this? Well, the reason is because there's two different types of cable which look exactly the same. Because remember, you could be going from the SATA ports on the motherboard, which is the host, to a target backplane. And the connectors on backplanes, well, they can be the same as the connector on an HBA card. Now these cables, they aren't interchangeable, even though they look exactly the same. And I've known people buying the wrong cables and then their drive's not working because they haven't paid attention to whether the cable, say the SATA ports, are the target or the SATA ports are the host. Anyway, let me just show you what I mean in a bit more detail when we look at the cables I've got here. So the backplane, which is my target, has the connector type an SFF8643. And these cables here in the cardboard box, well, they attach to the SATA host, so they attach to my motherboard. And you can see here that basically on one end is 4 regular SATA ports, and on the other end like a square plug thing. So let's go across to Amazon here. Now doing a search for a SAS cable, we can see here this one looks very similar. And what it says here is mini SAS to SATA cable, and it's an 843 to SATA forward breakout cable. So what that means is the host is the square block, the SFF8643, and the target is the SATA. So if I was to buy this cable, which looks almost identical, then that's going to be wrong, because I need my SATA ports to plug into the motherboard and the target to be the 8643. So another way this would have been written for the one I wanted would have actually been a reverse breakout cable. So that's just one thing to look out for when you're buying cables for HBAs and backplanes. And my other HBA cables here in the plastic packet here, this cable here, this plugs into the host, the HBA card, with the slightly older SFF8087 connector, which you can see on the right hand side here. And on the other end of the cable there's the more modern 8643 end, and each cable here from my HBA will allow me to fire up 4 hard drives. Okay, so my reverse breakout cables I'm going to plug into the motherboard before putting it into the machine, and then connect the cables across onto the backplane. Okay, so here on the backplane we can see 4 Molex power plugs. Now each one of these powers up 4 hard drives. So it's important when I connect these to the power supply that I make sure I use multiple cables going back to the PSU rather than just trying to power all 16 drives by using a splitter cable and just one power cable going back to the PSU. That would just be a bad idea. Now on the right hand side here, again we can see 4 SAS ports, and each port connects us to a row of 4 hard drives. And we can easily route the cables here underneath where the fans are through those holes that we can see. So hopefully connecting everything to the backplane shouldn't be too much of a problem. So the power supply was in my old server, so I needed to remove that. And yes, I know, look at the state of it, it's full of dust and the room's pretty messy as well. Now a lot of YouTubers, when they're showing a build, their rooms are pristine. But really guys, tell me in the comments below, all of us, we make a mess when we build something, right? Anyway, I got the power supply and cleaned it up and it all looks pretty nice, but I'm not actually going to fix it into the case as yet. I'm just going to put it in here and just check that it does fit. Because this is a modular power supply, it's just easier to route all of the cables and then pop in the PSU at the end. Oof! And as always, when working in a case, I've managed to cut my hand while working in a tight space. I don't know if you guys do, but I always seem to do something like this. Anyway, I managed to get all the power connectors pressed in well. I'm using 2 cables here, so each cable's doing 8 drives. And I probably could have avoided having to appease the IT gods with my blood had I been smart enough to remove the metal fan wall before trying to push things into the backplane. Okay, so I had all of the SATA ports now connected to the backplane. So now I needed to put in the PCIe devices, the GPU and the HBA card. Well, if you remember, I said I bought the short version of this case, and the 3080, well, it just doesn't fit into the actual case. And in my defense for buying a short version of this case and having a 3080 is, well, basically the long version wasn't in stock. In fact, had it been, it would have actually been cheaper to buy as well. And originally I'd actually planned to buy a 24 bay case, but they were out of stock too, so that's why I went for the 16 bay short version, which is 550 mils long rather than the regular 650, and that's what I've got here. So instead of the 3080 I had to use a shorter graphics card, and here I'm using an RX 6600 XT. Being shorter, this GPU fits fine. I quite like the RX 6600 XT, it's still pretty good for 1080p gaming, and has the added bonus if you want to run a Mac VM, you can pass this through to Mac OS and it's compatible with that system. Okay, so this is a few weeks on and I'm actually showing the server to Stefano from SPX Labs, and he's trying to pull out my USB stick there, little Wow, look at all that dust as well. I had no idea that was all there when this was filmed. Okay, so we can see here the HBA, the GPU. The cooler there, when I bought it, I was worried that would it actually fit in the case. Well, luckily it did. The case shuts fine. And the 120mm fans here. Now, I never actually did get round to replacing them to Noctua, because the Noctua fans I had in the other case, they were all 140s, not 120s. Okay, so there's the server now with a little less dust on than before. And on top of it, you can see another 4U rack mount case. When Stefano was over in the UK visiting, he helped me put this server together. No hot swap bays on this one because it's liquid cooled, with all solid state storage, NVMEs and SSDs. And if you want to see that build, then head on over to the official Uncast YouTube channel and you'll see that build there. Okay, so back to this build. When I bought the 16 bay case, I really wished I'd got a 24. Now I hadn't filled up the 16 bays, and I probably wouldn't do, but I still wanted the capability, just in case, you never know, that I might one day want 24 drives. Now luckily a friend, he really wanted the 16 bay case, and they were all out of stock, and the 24 was in stock. So basically we did a little deal, he had my 16 and I had this new 24. Now I needed to better connect another 8 drive bays, but I didn't want to have 2 HBA cards in my server. So I did a quick search on eBay. I was looking for an LSI 9300 16i. Now this card allows for up to 16 drives off the one card, so that was perfect for my needs. And as you can see here, this one was already flashed to ITE mode, so compatible for Unraid and TrueNAS. Now I got it for a good price on the 4th of October this year, only £51, but even since then it's already gone up, and the same seller now has put the price up to £62. But even at that price, still a really good deal for this card. Now, a new card, I obviously needed new cables. The original cables I bought were SFF 8343 to 8087. The 8087 being the connector on my older HBA card. But this newer card, on each end it was 8643, but now I needed 4 of these cables instead of 2. So I had to buy 2 packs of these cables to be able to connect up to the backplane. So all in all, with the HBA and the cables, this cost me around £90. So all the other components inside the server, they stayed exactly the same. But I wanted to make this server a little different. So I wanted to remove the front plate here and laser etch a design for my server onto that front panel, customizing my case. Now I thought this was pretty cool, maybe you guys will too. So I went up and put the front plate onto my Algo Laser Alpha, ready to engrave. Then I fired up Lightburn with an image I designed in Photoshop. My main server I called Base Star, so I did a design of a base star and some specs of the server. I set the engraving speed to what I thought it should be. Now my experience with laser cutters is only pretty recent, and in fact I've got a video, I'll upload it tomorrow, all about this laser cutter that I use and the things I learnt about using it, safety precautions, all that kind of thing, so that should be up tomorrow. Now this was my first attempt engraving into the stainless steel of the case, and the laser I've got is a diode laser, and it's quite hard for it to actually engrave into stainless steel. And I just wasn't really happy with how this turned out. You couldn't really see the design very well, it just didn't really stand out. So time for plan B. So I sprayed the metal panel black, thinking that would make the engraving come out much better. So second attempt at engraving. Yep, so even through viewing it through the webcam on Lightburn, I could see that this was much better than before. Yep, and I was pretty pleased with this. The only thing is where it says bays, well, there's a screw hole there, so I wasn't really very happy with that. But other than that, it looked pretty cool. Now, the reason I put things like CPU Intel, well, if I change the CPU, I don't need to re-engrave. Now that screw hole really did bug me, so I resprayed it black and engraved one last time, and this is what it looks like now. As well as extra dust on the top, well, I also engraved the IP address of the server as well. So altogether, I think it looks quite nice. So okay, to finish this video, I just want to talk about the power saving I've managed to get from this server. Now some of you may have seen a video I released a few months ago when I was thinking of actually changing my server. And the reason I gave, well, I'll tell you again. So a lot of the reason of this new server build is all about saving power. And my server at the moment probably uses idle between 130 and 140 watts. You know, it's not too bad, but for that all the drives need to be spun down and the CPU governor needs to be on power save, and I need to disable the kind of performance boost, turbo boost thing. Okay, so thanks for reminding us about that, old Space Invader 1. So when Baystar was rocking an AMD 5950X, it was using about 135 watts at idle. So let's see what the server's using now. But before we do, I just want to say that recently I've added a new UPS to my system, and I'm using a Tasmota smart plug which monitors the power right on the wall where the UPS is plugging into. So this power reading includes the UPS, and the UPS itself actually uses 20 watts. So with the server turned off, the reading from the wall is 20 watts. So from all the readings we see, we can minus 20 watts off, and that will give us the true power reading for this server. Okay, so the server's not using a lot of power. It's around 90 watts, it's fluctuating up and down a little bit. It even dropped as low as 84 and up to 99. So the average about 90 watts. But like I keep saying, this is including the UPS. We can minus 20 watts off this. So basically the server, really, it's only using about 70 watts idle. So this is much better than the 135 watts that the AMD was using. This is at least, I'd say, 60 watts more power efficient. Now again, I'm running the CPU governor in power save mode, and this power reading is when the server's not doing anything. But then again, 80% of the time my server is very much idling. So it's the idle power efficiency I'm interested in, not the peak power efficiency. Now to take these measurements, I do have all of the Docker containers actually stopped so I can get an idea of how much power it's using. On this server, I've got one VM running, this RetroNAS VM, and all of the drives are spun down. Now you can see here as well, I've actually got another 4 8TB drives in a ZFS array where I keep all of my emulation things here. So there's more drives in this server than there was previously, and it's using a lot less power. Now, if I go across to tools and we look at the hardware in the server, the GPU that I've got in this server here, obviously as well as the built-in Intel iGPU, I've got an AMD Radeon 6600 XT. So when upgrading to the 24-bay case, I left this GPU in. So with this build, I haven't really tried any of my NVIDIA GPUs yet, not my 3080 or my 2080 Ti. But now I've actually swapped it to the 24-bay case, I'm thinking maybe I'll move this GPU to my VM server and have that as a second GPU in there along with the 3080. Then I can run a Mac VM, Windows VMs, all my VMs on that one server. And I can put a 2080 Ti instead of this GPU. But I'm just a bit worried it might up the power a bit. So I reckon let's put the card in and test and see how much more power the actual GPU is going to use. Hopefully it won't make a lot of difference. So let's shut down the server and pop that GPU in. Okay, so we've got the GPU, the 2080 Ti, so let's move it out of the way for a moment. And now we need to open up the server and remove the RX 6600 XT. I do really like how that laser engrave turned out. I think it looks pretty sweet. But anyway, let's remove the lid. Then obviously disconnect the power cables and pull out the GPU. Now, as I was saying earlier, this GPU, if we compare it actually to the 2080 Ti, you can see it's quite a lot shorter. And as such, as I was saying earlier, none of the NVIDIA GPUs fitted in the shorter case. It's a shame because I think shorter cases would have been easier, making my server rack inside the arcade cabinet. Right, so I've got the power cables in, now I just need to push the graphics card home and then switch on the server and do some tests. Right, so as before we need all the Docker containers stopped, and to make sure all of the hard drives are spun down. So I'm just going to check on the dashboard, there's no Docker containers running, so let's see how much power this thing's using. Okay, so we're over 150 watts, we're actually at 160 watts here, so this GPU, as it is really not efficient. But you guys who follow this channel, you might remember a while ago I made a video about how to actually save power on an Unraid server when you're using an NVIDIA GPU. So Unraid can actually interact with the GPU itself. It needs to have the driver, so I'm installing that now. The driver alone won't reduce the power as much as we'd like. Well, it's 125 watts now, but it can be a lot lower. But to do that, we're going to have to use a script which will issue some commands. And if you want to use that script, just head across to my GitHub or watch the video where I show how to use it. Okay, so now the script run, the GPU should be able to idle in a low power state. Okay, so that seems a bit better. It's bouncing around 100 watts now. But still, the 2080 Ti, it's not quite as power efficient as the 6600 XT, using about 10 watts more in my server. But then again, it will also outperform the 6600 XT as well. So it's probably not going to cost a lot more to really run it, but let's ask ChatGPT anyway. If I use 10 watts 24/7 365 days per year, and my electricity costs 30 pence per kilowatt hour, how much, spelt wrong, will it cost me to run for a year? Also, please tell me the same for 90 watts and 100 watts respectively. Thank you.
Well, meatbag, let me do some quick calculations for you. For 10 watts running 24/7 for a year, 10 watts times 24 hours per day times 365 days per year, divided by 1000 equals 87.6 kilowatt hours. Now multiply that by your electricity cost. So, it will cost you approximately 26 pounds and 28 pence to run a 10 watt device 24/7 for a year. Now, for 90 watts. Running a 90 watt device 24/7 for a year will cost you around 236 pounds and 52 pence. And finally, for 100 watts. To run a 100 watt device 24/7 for a year, it will cost you approximately 262 pounds and 80 pence. So keep those calculations in your shiny metal noggin and don't go bankrupt, meatbag.
So that's the type of reply you get from ChatGPT when you forget to turn off the persona you created for it based off Bender from Futurama. Okay guys, so let's wrap things up. So basically, what do I think of the i5-13600K? Well, I think it's an absolutely excellent CPU. It's been really good for me. And I know recently Intel have brought out their 14th gen CPUs as well. So now you can get the 14600K, and when I've been looking, it's actually been cheaper than the 13600. Now the 13th gen and 14th gen, the performance is really close. There's not really much in it. It's just a refresh, nothing major. And I think if you were to choose either a 14th gen or 13th gen i5, you'd be pretty happy for it with your server. Now before I started all of this, I did think to myself that I'd end up running the i9 CPU, but there really was just no reason for me to do it. The i5 ran all of my VMs how I wanted. Although I didn't show it you in this video, I was running a gaming VM on this hardware, and all of my Docker containers were running flawlessly. Now I must say I've used AMD for years, and to be honest I kind of felt a little bit guilty switching to Intel, but the quick sync, it really made it worth it. For that reason on its own, today I would switch to Intel. If you run a media server, MB, Plex, Jellyfin, well, the iGPU is going to transcode for you. What's the point in having another GPU to do that work? The iGPU also works well with TDAR if you use that for converting your media library. Well, I don't think I've got anything else to say or anything else to show you today, so let's wrap this video up. Thank you very much guys for watching. I really hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, I'd really appreciate you hitting the like button. Doing that does really help the channel. But again, I want to give a really big thank you to all of my patrons and supporters out there. Thank you guys from the bottom of my heart for all your support. It really means the world to me. Anyway guys, I guess it's time for me to go, but whatever you're up to for the rest of the day, I hope it's good, and I'll catch you in the next video.